Okay, so here's the historical context, and I'm going to do this very brief. So if there's any experts out there, do not fill in your own gaps. So collecting written knowledge is as old as written knowledge itself, right? So the Sumerians invented writing, called cuneiforms, in what is present-day Iraq. Egyptians used papyrus to record information. I'm really skipping around here. Greek temples held libraries, and philosophical texts were written on perishable materials like papyrus and parchment, and a lot of copying took place. So many of these collections of records were destroyed in the course of wars and are purposely purged when rulers are replaced or when governments fall. So Middle East, Greece, China, those are sort of some of the examples. And in the Middle Ages, the European monastic communities were set up and books were found to be essential to the spiritual life. So many of the monks, especially those in the Benedictine order, held a pretty strict obligation to preserve these texts by copying them by hand. So we'll, of course, because there was nothing else to do, skip a few hundred years to the 14th, 15th centuries. So the printing press was invented, and universities had libraries. But what these libraries did was prepare male students for careers. So what do all these libraries have in common? That's another rhetorical question for y'all. Male-dominated work. So we're going to fast forward now to 1952. So I'm sorry, not 1952. Holy cow. 1852. The first woman clerk was hired at the Boston Public Library, and by 1910, so over a period of 50, 60 years, over 78% of all library workers in the United States were women. So perceptions changed big time over this time period. So you can see on the left, you've got this grim-looking, ineffectual, bookish, maybe the Noah Weil of his time, period in 1870, where the librarian was this preoccupied man. And then switch gears to 1905, move forward a few years, the stereotype shifted in the media to the portrayal of women and all of the terrible Victorian spinster baggage that comes with that. So you can see, she looks very sad, doesn't she? So soon after, in 1909, a librarian used the word stereotype as documented for the first time, so objecting to the use of the portrayal of the profession in fiction. But librarian and its stereotypes are all wrapped up in all the larger societal issues. So the nature of library work was made to fit in with women's work. And once librarianship became a feminized profession, and service work in particular, that it became the norm because it was believed, according to Garrison's research, that women would not feel humiliated by serving, by playing in the library the part they played at home. So.
So Melvil Dewey's name might sound familiar. That's how public libraries organize their collections. In academic libraries, we use the Library of Congress, but Melvil Dewey's system is in public libraries. So he has been both a blessing and a curse to the profession, specifically to women. So he did pave the way for women by requiring a higher level of education to work in libraries. And Columbia University, I think Cindy mentioned earlier, was the first library school. And so women were able to enroll in that program and get a higher level of education to enter a profession that required more education. So that was great. Unfortunately, he positioned women as cheap labor to help stabilize declining library budgets. Not so great for women. And he was also obsessed with efficiency in scientific management, and that has been detrimental to the profession, as you can see in the images, especially, the cop, the ineffectual, stamping, shushing, shelving, all of that ties into that. Gary and Marie Radford's research, in their research, they have said that Dewey created and perpetuated a submissive, dependent, spinsterish librarian image, and that has had a lot of staying power. So the old maid image, in line with that, had been proliferating and was especially problematic in the 30s and the 40s. And that's actually when librarians were referred to as mousers in the stacks. So Dewey did try to divorce the profession from that term and those images, but unfortunately it just became much more entrenched. So the profession tried turning the stereotype on its head with this idea of the sexy, glamorous librarian. So unfortunately, that came from within librarianship and not outside of librarianship. There were actually job ads for glamour girls. And in 1943, there was a glamorous Reader's Advisor librarian job posting featured on the cover of Mademoiselle. And at the time, it was apparently exciting for younger librarians. However, they did seem to have mixed feelings about this. And it didn't do much to improve the image of librarians or the overarching societal challenges for women. So it didn't replace being old maids. It just added another stereotype of sexy, and these two were essentially mutually exclusive. So this combination sort of turned into a Madonna horror type of dichotomy in a way, reflecting the views and expectations of women in society. And again, with the Radfords, they highlight that there is a clear relationship between the representation and treatment of women and the low status of the library profession. And a quick note on how architecture has influenced the stereotype is good to note as well. So between 1883 and 1929, 3,500 Carnegie libraries were built, and they all had a similar feature of this central reference desk, which kind of served as a panopticon for the reference librarian to keep an eye on patron activity, keep everyone in line. It was sort of a positioning for the authoritarian stereotype. So this just reinforced it. And a lot of libraries are still designed that way today. As libraries renovate, we're trying to change that and not have a reference desk at the center, but because so many libraries do still have that, this is perpetuated.
So I'm sure all of you are familiar with these types of memes, these sum card memes. So why do they continue to persist? Well, the Stereotypes act as a mental shortcut, like you mentioned, but I would say maybe only one of these memes actually describe what librarians, actually none of these describe what librarians do. Let me take that back. But they talk about our appearance and our personalities, but one does mention, you know, I do this for the money, prestige, and power, said no librarian ever. So maybe when you think about librarians and you see these depictions in media, you can focus on the smart, intelligent women that you heard from tonight and think about the shortcuts that show up. So why are these stereotypes so harmful? So I have two examples for you. One of those is status and pay. So this is from 2011, but it's still fairly relevant. Feminized professions such as librarians get paid less than male-dominated fields. And So the profession can be negatively impacted because some may not want to consider librarianship as a career based on status and pay of librarians and maybe don't see it as a viable profession compared to others. So, you know, you think back when you were thinking about what kind of career you wanted to have and what was important to you. So we can't really offer the status and pay. But on the slide, you'll see the librarians that were required to have master's degrees. And librarian technicians only have high school diploma compared to accountants, which this is sort of true. They have bachelor's, but then there's also CPA licenses as well. And database administrators which are required to have bachelor degrees. But in industries that are male-dominated, the pay scale is tipped much higher. Oops, I'm sorry. Another example, I don't have a slide for this, so you'll just have to imagine in your own experience the emotional labor that librarians carry. So this is a requirement of service workers and a high expectation for workers in the library field as in other fields. So emotional labor is the ability to manage emotions, both your own and others. So according to our own American Library Association guidelines, library workers must welcome users and put them at ease and make them comfortable in stressful or overwhelming situations. So the role of caretaker is very common in this profession and also other feminized professions or for women in general. So probably every workplace, women carry some amount of emotional labor. But Madison argues that emotional labor is a key component of many library jobs, and research on emotional labor shows that there can be both positive and negative effects on individuals, such as on the positive side, job satisfaction, but on the negative side, job burnout, as a result of having to manage emotional labor. So perceptions of how librarians demonstrate emotions to their users can have a positive or negative effect on their users. So awareness of emotional labor is important for us to recognize. And I'll turn it to Nicole.
Okay, so another way that the stereotypes are harmful is that they impact the diversity of the field, which also impacts how we work with our diverse users. So Chris Borg, who's the director of MIT Libraries, broke down what she calls the unbearable whiteness of librarianship. So you can see these two pie charts here. On the left, we have the demographics of librarians in 2010. The blue is white librarians. And on the right, we have the U.S. population in 2013. And again, the blue is white. So it's not quite matching up there. So stereotypes keep librarianship very white by implying how librarians are supposed to look and act. And I didn't mention that the field is over 80% white. So these stereotypes often follow a set of white middle-class norms, potentially closing off the profession to those not fitting into those demographics. And so the stereotype is not the only reason for the lack of diversity in the field, but it certainly doesn't help. Then the stereotypes also can negatively impact students and their success. So there's the issue of library anxiety. As Cindy mentioned, when people come into the library, they might feel overwhelmed or anxious. And library anxiety is an actual term. It's a real thing. There's been research done on it. The stereotypes do not depict librarians as helpful or friendly, and this really contributes to the anxiety that users feel when they enter the library. And that could be from too many resources, confusing organizational system, or again, perceiving librarians as unhelpful or mean. So this creates more anxiety then, where students might avoid the library, procrastinate on research projects, so it's not very good for them. And the image on the left is from Project Information Literacy, which is a large-scale study on how students use and interact with the library. And they found 12 common terms that undergraduate students were using to describe their research projects. And out of the 12, only 2 are positive. So we have fear, angst, tired, dread, excited, anxious, annoyed, stressed, disgusted, I don't know about that one, intrigued is good, confused, and overwhelmed. So this shows how important it is for faculty and students to work with librarians to diffuse this anxiety, because a lot of these terms are really coming from or stemming from some sort of anxiety related to using the library or doing research. On the right, that's an image from the Ariel study. It's a large ethnographic study looking at similar things, student perceptions of the library, how students use the library. So from that study, it was found that students don't know what librarians do or that they can ask for help. So that also contributes to being anxious about perceiving librarians as mean if they don't know what we do. And here, very much so, the stereotype does, again, serve as a mental shortcut for assumptions about librarians' helpfulness or intelligence. And also from the study, it was found that faculty broker students' relationships with the library. So it was found that if faculty are positive about the library and encourage students to use the library, students then feel more positive about the library and are more likely to use it and come in and ask for help and do their research. And again, this reinforces connecting students with libraries and librarians as being important, and that teaching faculty have a very big role in this relationship. So, where do we go from here? Of course, we only very superficially touched on some very important issues that are examined further. There has been research in the field. And of course, Cindy and I do not have all the answers. Otherwise, we would have completely fixed the profession and all of society by now. But we do have some suggestions. So one, help increase awareness about what librarians actually do so that the facts replace how the stereotypes function. And so thank you to all of you for coming here tonight, because that's one step in doing that. Another is to be aware of how librarians and others in feminized professions are portrayed. Mary Beth mentioned nursing having similar problems. So nursing, social work, teaching are 3 heavily feminized professions that have similar problems. Another is to envision librarians as partners and collaborators rather than solely helpers, although we do help. The latter is tied to women's work and the idea of serving or helping. Another problem is perceiving serving and helping as a negative thing because it's related to women. So we have all these entanglements out there that really come from what's going on in society, but they reflect in the profession. And then for faculty, if anybody's here, we have one faculty member. Faculty could have students engage more with the library, and faculty can collaborate more with librarians as partners. So, like I said, it's a larger structural issue in society. Systemic change also needs to happen. The onus can't only be on individuals to make society and its institutions less sexist and racist, but hopefully this is a start. And I think, is that it? Okay, if there's no other questions, thank you so much.